My best friend became my brother-in-law. He called me and said, hey, I just got back from the doctor and I have brain cancer. Put the phone down and I started making a list of things that I was scared about of starting a company and then things that I wasn't scared about. I realized that the things I was scared about were not really that scary. I quit the next day.
What did those early stages look like?
What tripped me up initially is when you're like, okay, now we got to add people. And you start thinking, well, yeah, it would be great to have somebody to do this part of the business, but I can still do it. And then you find yourself doing accounting Saturday night at midnight, and you're like, wait a second, this is not for the best. What gets me excited is the starting phase and the building phase. You have to get to the point as quickly as possible in your business that you are working on only the things that you are uniquely qualified to do.
Everybody, welcome back to Success Rewritten. I'm your host, Emily Lomenzo-Washkovic, and today I have with me Jay Baer, a customer experience expert, researcher, author, and now known as the co-founder of Tequila Report. Jay, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Emily, great to be here. Awesome to see you as always.
I am very fortunate to have met you years and years ago just through reading your work and knowing about you as a person. But then I was able to actually virtually meet you last year to do some work while I was still at Yelp. And I've just always idolized who you are as an individual, how you show up online and share your work. But for anyone who maybe doesn't know you or doesn't know about your journey, can you just tell people who you are, your expertise, and kind of where you got to today?
Sure. Thanks. Those are kind words. I started in politics when I was just out of school and was a professional campaign consultant for a little bit, and then realized that that's not a job I wanted to do forever, and got into what we've now considered to be traditional marketing. I worked for a large company doing marketing, and then very, very early, I got into what we now call digital marketing, so early that domain names were still free. Like you could get whatever domain name you wanted. In fact, I think I've told you this story before. My partners and I, in our first internet company, we sold the domain name Budweiser.com to Anheuser-Busch. This is in 1993, mind you. We sold it for 50 cases of beer. That is a true story. True story.
You have not told me that story before. That is amazing. What other domains did you buy?
We had all of them. We had alcohol.com. We had Guinness.com. We sold that for 2 trips to Ireland. My partner in that company, he registered some domain names without me. And one of the ones that he registered was beer.com. And he subsequently sold that for like $5.3 million to Molson. And he hasn't really worked much since. And here I am doing podcasts with Emily. So, you really know. You never know.
Oh, I cannot believe that. But can I also just say, oddly enough, you're the second guest so far on Success Rewritten who was selling domains back in the day. Like, we got to figure out what the new version of that is now. There's something.
It's probably crypto is probably what it is actually, or NFTs before that.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
So yeah, I did digital, and then I got in from digital. I got into consulting, and then speaking and writing books, and now Tequila. But that was the journey.
Well, I just love how the first websites that you're referencing buying are all alcohol based, and it comes full circle to Tequila Report.
I was 23, right? I plead innocence. Yeah, but yeah, and now of course I'm in the alcohol business, so I guess there is some circularity of that.
I like it. Okay. I want to go all the way back to this transition that you had from working for someone else to being your own boss, and you never turned back. But what caused that initial shift? Can you just tell us that story and that early day journey you had?
Yeah, I come from a long line of entrepreneurs. I'm a 6th generation entrepreneur. My family's been self-employed on my dad's side since 1842, I think. And so there was never like sit you down and tell you about that you should start your own company. It was just like the osmosis, right? Of course, that's what you would do. And that was always my plan. But coming out of college, first I started in politics, and then I got some pretty good jobs in the early days digital space and things like that. And so I got married and then had a kid. And it was sort of like, okay, yeah, I want to start my own thing, but I got kind of a good deal going here. Why would I want to pull the rug out from under myself? And starting a business is a risk. And I just didn't want to take that risk, frankly. But at that same time, my best friend since 2nd grade actually married my wife's sister. So my best friend became my brother-in-law, which I very much recommend. It makes, holidays a lot better. If you can socially engineer that, do it. And we were 30. He was 30. I was 30. We were all 30. And he called me and said, "Hey, I just got back from the doctor and I have brain cancer." And put the phone down and I started making a list of things that I was scared about of starting a company, and then things that I wasn't scared about. And I realized that the things I was scared about were not really that scary. And I quit the next day, and I haven't worked for anybody since then. I sort of realized that like what I was scared of was so inconsequential compared to what he was facing that I was just holding myself back. And so I solved that problem.
Do you remember what some of those things were that you were scared of?
Well, a lot of it was just, I had a very young child and a wife. And a lot of it was like, okay, I'm getting paid X. And if I quit this job, I'm getting paid 0. And so the difference between X and 0 is literally infinity. And that's a challenge, right? And so a lot of it was just like, what do I do if this doesn't work? And then I sort of realized like, well, okay, I'm pretty good at this. I know a lot of people. If it doesn't work out, I can go get a job from somebody else will hire me. Like, we're not going to starve. We'll figure it out. And then it was proven true. What I did was I sat down right after I quit and I called like 300 people. I called like the 300 business people I knew. I was in Phoenix at the time. And it took me like a week. And I said, I'm starting a new thing to do X, sort of digital consulting, essentially, very, very early. Would you be interested? Of that 300 calls, I got like 6 clients and have not ever had an unprofitable month since then. And that was 28 years ago, I think.
Oh my gosh. Jay, you're dating yourself. You do not look like that was 28 years ago.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. It's the soft lighting.
Okay. So you start doing your own thing. Do you remember the first time on the entrepreneurial independent journey where you were like, we need money? Like, it sounds like you were profitable, but there had to be these periods where what you were building was also kind of expensive, taxing on you, maybe non-financially. Like, what did those early stages look like?
The other way around, I think. The other way around, because we did come out of the gates pretty good. We found a market fit. And so, the cash flow side was fine. What tripped me up initially is the same that trips up a lot of entrepreneurs is when you're like, okay, now I got to add people because people are expensive. And you start thinking, well, yeah, it would be great to have somebody to do this part of the business, but I can still do it. And then you can have somebody do this part of the business, but I can still do that too. And then you find yourself doing accounting, Saturday night at midnight. And you're like, wait a second, this is not for the best. And like a number of people, I actually read E-Myth, which is such a classic. In fact, I just recommended it to a young entrepreneur the other day who hadn't heard of it. It is such a classic book that explains in very simple terms how to work on your business, not in your business. And it's one of those books that I think everybody should read because it really shows you that this idea that you can do it all is very short-sighted thinking. And if, can you do it better than somebody you hire? Probably. But that extra 10% is immaterial to the success of your business.
Absolutely. Do you remember, was there a lot of friction on your time before you hired the first person? Like, were you able to balance that? Did you feel like, because it sounds like your family was young in that stage, which is a motivator to make money, but what did the time relationship look like?
It wasn't I was busy. I'm always like got a lot going on and always have, right? Even in high school, I set the record. This is in 1987 and it's still a record today. So we're 39 years later. I still have the record for most activities ever by one student at my high school. So having a lot on my plate is not a new or rare scenario. So it wasn't so much I didn't have time. It was just that all of my time was occupied. And I don't dislike that, frankly. Like, I'm not good at free time. That's when you start buying domain names randomly. But I just realized that I had to free up some of my headspace to focus on bigger and more strategic things. It wasn't so much about time. It was about how do I spend my time? And as I started other companies down the road, one of the things we used to do in my former consulting firm Convince and Convert, is every year in our annual strategy session, we'd have the whole team together and we'd actually go through and audit all the things that I spend time on. And then the goal as a company was to take 10% of that away. And if you do that every year, like eventually it's almost like making like a concentrated sauce, right? You're boiling it down and boiling it down. And what I tell entrepreneurs is that you have to get to the point as quickly as possible in your business that you are working on only the things that you are uniquely qualified to do. Not qualified, uniquely qualified. And if you can do that, it will allow the organization as a whole to operate at its highest potential.
Such great advice. Okay, I know that you sold businesses recently, but before then was the world of you being an author, not of one book, but of many books. Can you just talk to us about what that process was like? I know there was researching, concept building, like from your perspective, what did the author journey look like?
I didn't necessarily set out to write a book. Before I wrote my first book, I had a blog. It was a very successful blog. And it was at one point, the number 2 marketing blog in the world. So we had millions and millions of readers. And a publisher called me and said, "Would you like to write a book?" And I was like, "Sure." That was the easiest way to get a book deal for sure. And so I co-wrote it with my good friend Amber Naslund. It was all about social business and how to hire people differently for a social media age. And that went pretty well. And we started doing some presentations of the book to different groups. And people said, "Oh, that was really good. You should give more speeches." I said, "Should I?" And they said, "Yes." And that's how I became a speaker. It wasn't like a business model. It was like people just said you were good at it. And so I started to pursue it and then turned it into a business model for sure. But my thing on books is that the way I write them is, especially as a consultant, I have the advantage of talking to lots of different types of businesses all the time. And I try to be an active listener. And when I hear a business owner or an executive ask a question, I try to really pay attention to that. And then I think, oh, well, somebody else asked a similar question and somebody else asked a similar question. And I always think, well, these folks who are in many cases some of the biggest companies in the world that I was working for, if they don't know the answer to this, hardly anybody knows the answer. And maybe I should go find the answer. So then I would go do a bunch of first party research and come up with some ideas and say, all right, here's what you need to do for the next 2 years-ish to solve that problem. And then once that cycle was over, I'd come up with another problem to solve and write a different book based on different research, which is why my 7 books are all about marketing and customer experience, generally speaking, but about very different topics within that field, right? One's about word of mouth, one's about customer service, one's about speed, one's about content marketing, et cetera. Because at the time I wrote those books, those were business challenges that organizations were struggling with. And so I still kind of do that now. I tell people I'm not a futurist, I'm a presentist.
I like that. And something about your work is not only do you temp check like what people are thinking about or needing, but you also really back it up and go find all of the supporting, not only data, but like stories. That is the right way to address it. Can you just tell me how, like, I know as a reader or as someone that used to recommend your stuff, stories make things so relatable and easier to digest. But as an author, it's like a really hard thing to do to bring all of these examples to the forefront. Can you just talk about that process and how you kind of bring it together?
I actually have a little secret on that I'm delighted to share. And you're exactly right. Like the data is really important to me because what I hate is authors, especially in the business category, who say, do this thing because I said so. And I'm like, bro, how about some math around that? Right? Like, you know, like I'm a Libra. Like I gotta have some numbers here. It's one of the reasons I got into politics, right? I loved politics more than I loved marketing because in electoral politics, there's no ambiguity. Well, there didn't used to be. You either won the election or you lost, right? And then somewhere along the lines, we decided that those rules don't apply. But historically, right, at the day after the election, you're either super happy or super unhappy. And I liked that degree of finality. So I got into digital marketing, which is the most measurable part of the marketing ecosystem. Anyway, so that's why the data part's important. But you're exactly right that nobody remembers the stats. They only remember the stories. How do you find the stories? So the way I write books is very different. I do the research And then I write a speech. And I do the keynote version of that talk 25 times-ish. And in that 25 times, I tell every audience, I'm working on a book of this material. I will be in front of the stage at the conclusion of my talk. I suspect that many of you in the audience have a story about this principle. Please share it with me. So almost every single story in all 7 books came from an audience member, which is why the stories that I tell are not stories that people have heard. You won't hear me talking about Starbucks or Amazon or Apple or, Disney or all the stuff that's kind of a trite trope of business concepts. They're like weird little businesses or sometimes big businesses, but just things that people don't know about. And it's because I didn't find them. The audience found them for me.
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating. As someone who's followed your work, it makes complete sense when you explain it, but it's almost like a comedian who does stand up. People don't realize how long they're testing that stuff out before they put together the 60-minute show,
It's why when I do a speech, I pretty much start from scratch every year. Like no slides, no topic. Here's the speech for the year. The same way a comedian is I'm going to do a new hour. Like I'm a huge student of stand-up comedy and spend a lot of time looking at it and going to shows and things like that. And I do approach it a really similar way. So it's a good pickup on your part. I also, when I'm doing the stories, I actually have a grid for the book. So I've got like a 4-box grid, which is, it's really actually a 6-box grid. So it's small business, larger business, B2C business, B2B business, and then American business, international business. And I want to make sure that I've got stories that cover every one of those boxes. Because what you don't want is a reader to say, I love this concept, but I don't see myself in it because I'm a small business or I'm in Belgium or whatever, right? So you want to give everybody enough crumbs to be like, oh yeah, that could be me too.
That's so fascinating. As someone that not only read Hug Your Haters to study for my own job, but also recommended it a million times, I would pull stories from there. And then you're right. I would also use stories of businesses that I had talked to because the listener doesn't always need to know the story, but sometimes putting them in the story, like you would speak about brands like REI or Land's End in Hug Your Haters, so that the reader could think of themselves as a customer. And I always thought that was so smart. I mean, people want to see themselves in what they're reading, especially if it's business or self-help. I want to talk a little bit about the right moment or concept for the right time, because you've had some times in your career where you were gonna get going and rolling on a concept and then it didn't feel appropriate. Can you just walk people through that story for us?
Well, it's like it was talked about a second ago. I want to have recommendations that are data backed. I just feel like it's important, right? It's people rely on what I say, both as a consultant and as a presenter and as an author. And I just don't feel comfortable writing a book. It's like, I got a vibe that says that you should do this. I think it's dishonest intellectually. And so that's why every book has a first party foundational research element to it. And when I wrote Hug Your Haters, the original idea for that book, which was 2012, something like that. I get very confused on the dates. I know my age of my children, but the age of the books are harder. And so when I wrote that book, the original idea, the original thesis that I took to the research was that responsiveness and speed is the most important element of the customer experience. And we did the research and we discovered that was not the case. At that point, the most important thing was answering at all. Because at that point, and it's still a little bit of a problem today, perplexingly, but then it was a real problem that, people would reach out to a business through any manner of tactics, right? Phone, email, hostage note, whatever. And they would hear nothing back. And so we actually documented in that book how deleterious that is to customer attitudes and loyalty and revenue when you just ghost your customers. And that's why a lot of my books, when you read them back now, many years later, like, well, of course you wouldn't ghost your customers. But trust me when I tell you, the time when we wrote that book, it happened all the time, and we have the data to back it up.
100%.
But what's interesting about that particular one is that my most recent book, The Time to Win, is all about the fact that speed is a competitive advantage because I redid the research a decade later and now it is true. So that was actually really fun for me to be like, yeah, I predicted this 10 years ago and I wasn't, it was just too early. And now what I thought was going to happen has happened. And now let's write the book. So it was like like an elephant 10-year gestation period on that concept.
It's so cool though. It's so cool. And it gives so much more perspective on why your credibility and your work has been so well received and digested. It's like you said, it's not just your opinions or your feeling. It really is aligned with what's happening around us as entrepreneurs and consumers. And by the way, Hug Your Haters was 2016, which is crazy. That's like a lot more recent and further away than I thought. I don't know, a decade ago? That seems crazy. And I do know back then, I think the Yelp stat, I won't know it exactly, but it was something like only 15 to 20% of businesses were responding to their reviews. So it was very accurate at the time. And it's still low. It's still low.
Still low. And people still don't. I wish the book was even more successful than it was, because it's still shocking to me that people don't understand that responding has like material business impact.
You and I could talk about that for forever, but if business owners care about that stuff, go watch me and Jay on Behind the Review, because that's where we really get into it. And I'll link that in the show notes too, even though, I don't need to give them more traffic, but that particular video is really good. And you make that topic so palatable. And for many people, it's not. It's a very emotional and stressful topic. Just so that we do not digress into the world of responding to reviews, let's come to your first sale of your business. Before we even get into the story of like how it went down, I just feel like I always have to call out the weird stigma or like differing of opinion of if selling the business is like a success point or if it's like something to work towards versus a failure. And so I just kind of want to put that out there as you walk us through your journey. Like, what were you thinking and how did that idea of selling kind of come up and go about?
I've sold 3 now, and it's kind of the same every time. What gets me excited is the starting phase and the building phase. The running phase, I don't love it as much. And I'm also not great at scaling companies because I tend to manage with instinct and inspiration more so than with process and structure. And I try to surround myself with people who are very good at process and structure because of that. But, there are people who, and I've done a lot of angel investing, and all entrepreneurs are kind of one or the other, right? You're either good at the first 5 years or you're good at year 6 and beyond. And I am a first 5 years guy. And I realized that over time. And so at some point, I am really, really good at coming up with an idea and launching that idea and taking it to market. But then at some point, my style is actually an impediment to future growth. And so I also get bored. And so at that point, I'm like, okay, the growth trajectory is flattening. We need somebody else who comes at this from a different perspective. And that's when it's like, you know what, maybe it's time to sell this one. And so that's how I've done it every time. You try to be as dispassionate about it as you can. It's hard though, because even in all the acquisitions I've been involved in, I've been really fortunate in that I've always sold to friends, which is not an easy trick to pull off, but I have, and good friends, right? And people that I truly trust and admire as business people and as colleagues. And so it's always gone fine. But, somebody else is now raising your baby. Right? It's like taking your company and giving it up for adoption. And that always carries some emotional baggage because they make decisions that you wouldn't make, and they treat people in a way that maybe you wouldn't treat them, and they pursue opportunities that maybe you would or wouldn't pursue. And it's really hard. I would say during my sort of earn-out phases, when I was on board companies that I started after I sold and before I fully exited, is the most emotionally difficult parts of my career.
Well, that's what I was going to ask.
You want to be in charge, but you're not, right? And it's like minister without portfolio, right? And then your team is also like, well, I know this is Jay's baby and he's still kind of around, but I know I'm supposed to ask the new guys. And so it's a little awkward for them too. It's like, oh, let's hang out with your ex-boyfriend kind of deal, right? And so it's just a little awkward, and you get through it, and that's what the money's for at some level. But yeah, it's not my favorite time.
Well, and the thing that I always find fascinating when I talk to entrepreneurs who have sold and stuck around for a transition period is you really kind of realize how much is going to change that's not going to align with maybe the way you would have done things. And you're still like around, but your opinion doesn't matter. Was there any real standout things that you remember, like, it like really upset you or shocked you and you were still involved, but you had to kind of stay quiet about it?
I remember when I sold my first consulting firm to a larger marketing services firm that did more things, right? So we just did digital. They did traditional advertising and public relations and a number of other services. The way they figured out, like, client has X budget, and how do we apportion that budget between different disciplines? I was like, this is bonkers. Like, this is not the right way to do this, because a lot of it was sort of based on who yells the loudest, not necessarily which is the best outcome for this client. And I'm like, that can't be right. I'm not shy, right? I raise my hand and be like, hey, I feel like this is maybe not the way I would do this. Like, it's probably not, but it's also not your company. Like, fair point. I'm going to go back to my desk now.
Yeah, that's good though. Like, kind of doing the emotional labor of knowing when to speak up, and then you read the feedback in the room and you decide based on that.
I mean, as a consultant for so many years, right? If you're bothered by people not taking your advice, don't be in consulting because it happens all the time.
It's all it happens.
Exactly. And I'm so fortunate because my very first boss, I was 17, 18. I was an intern for a marketing and public affairs firm. I was a kid. I was a child. I could barely drive. And my boss there was incredible. And he told me something like, on my first day as a professional ever, he said, you need to understand something. Our job is to give our clients our best professional advice. Their job is to decide whether to take it. And as the first piece of advice ever given to me, that was pretty darn good. And I rely on it still to this day.
It nailed it on the head.
Yeah. And I've had to coach a lot of young professionals who I brought onto the team as strategists who get really bothered by, we told them to do the thing and they didn't do the thing. And I'm like, I know. And sometimes they won't. We can do a better job of making sure they understand that what we're telling them is valid and accurate and important and should be implemented. But we can't fight all their fights for them, right? You don't know what all the pressures they're on from their boss or the other department or whatever. Like, they got things that they're trying to navigate that we don't know, even as consultants. And so you can't take it personally.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I learned that luckily before I was doing my own thing because I was on the inside, right? Like, I'd have these meetings with agencies or consultants thinking we're ready to get rolling. And the next thing you know, you're not really signing a contract. You're hiring them for like a month. And to you internally, it doesn't feel like that long. But as the one trying to get the deal, you're like, what is going on? I thought we were ready to roll. It's been 4 weeks. Are you ghosting me? Like, what is happening? So that's a really good reminder. When you sold your businesses, did you always already have your next kind of thing going, or did you take breaks in between? What was that like?
That's a great question. No.
How did I know you didn't take breaks?
Well, I didn't take breaks, but I kind of did. So when I sold the first agency, I had a non-compete. And so I couldn't do consulting, at least in the region. And so I moved. And so then I had a different region, and I didn't necessarily mean to do it. I wasn't trying to compete. I was going to be a college professor. So they wanted me to go be a marketing professor. And then I almost went to do that. And then that was right when we had sort of the late 90s economic collapse. And so all of a sudden my savings was diminished by the stock market and my house wasn't worth anything. I was like, I can't afford to go teach college right now. And so I set that aside and started to do some more consulting, and then kind of, moved so my non-compete wouldn't be enforced, and then ended up building another consulting firm because it's the one thing I knew how to do. And then when I sold that one, when I got out of Convince and Convert, the way we wrote the deal was that I kept all the speaking and we sold all the consulting.
Cool.
So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go be a keynote speaker and an author. And that was fine with them and fine with me. And so for a year, that's all I did. And then I started to make tequila videos randomly. And then I managed to turn my hobby into a job.
The perfect segue into Tequila Report. So bring me to current day. Tell everyone what Tequila Report is. Let's just talk about getting that going and the launch of that.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I sold the company and I used to host a podcast called Social Pros for 10 years. And when I sold the company, the podcast went with it. And so I used to spend X number of hours a week doing this podcast, and now I don't have that time occupied. Wouldn't it be fun to teach people some of the things I've learned about tequila over the last 30 years as a fan of tequila and a student? And so I started making some Instagram videos and TikTok videos, and they were terrible, just terrible. But I'd never really done any short form content. So it's kind of fun to try and hey, let's figure this out. And then I recruited my now business partner, Maddie Jager, to appear in a few videos with me. I actually said, would you like to be in one video? And she said, if you insist, because she's very uncomfortable on camera. She's actually amazing on camera, but she doesn't like it. And so she was on one video, but it was great. And then we ended up doing, I don't know how many we ended up doing, 600 videos together. And we grew an audience of hundreds of thousands of fans. And so we did that business for 3 years, 3.5 years. And then at the beginning of this year, we said, we need to build a platform company, not just Jay and Maddie on camera, because that's not a scalable business, right? It's good business, fun. We're making money, but it's not really a business. And so we then said, okay, we're going to move out of the short form video game and get into longer form narrative. And so we built Tequila Report, tequilareport.com, which is a magazine, right? It's an online magazine, email newsletter, events, merchandise, etc. And it's like Rolling Stone or Wine Spectator, but for tequila. We also now run, again, a consulting business where we support 18 different tequila brands and help them with their business growth. So as Maddie said the other day, did we just sell a consulting firm and then start another consulting firm, but all the clients are tequila? And I'm like, yep. She's like, how did that happen? I'm like, not sure, but here we are.
That's incredible though. And it's kind of ironic because we were just out to eat last night at a favorite Mexican place of ours, and they have a bunch of new lit tequila signs on the wall. And my husband and I were commenting on the fact that at a Mexican restaurant like this, for example, if people aren't asking for certain tequila or you're not doing changes or specials with your margs, you're not using different tequila. And you can tell how this restaurant, they probably have some really good reps and they're also interested in mixing it up. And so they're always doing specials now. And you can just see how it's very cohesive, not competitive when it comes to what they're doing in their space. But I was thinking, yeah, tequila itself is such an industry where it is all about getting the word out there, knowing how to market yourself. And that's probably not what they're experts in. I mean, they're good at making the product. So you're kind of helping bridge that gap, right? Between what they're doing and how people hear about them or understand their brand.
Absolutely. And then we also don't just consult. We built a cohort of tequila brands with Maddie and I at the center because all these brands are quite small. And they are trying to solve all the same challenges, but they're trying to solve them themselves, which is the worst way to solve a challenge. And so we basically built an EO or YPO chapter, but for tequila brands. So yes, we provide a lot of advice and counsel, but it's more about them helping each other and us bringing them together and facilitating that interaction. So we just had our first conference a few weeks ago. We had all the brands together in one room and spent 2 days, being open and honest and how do you solve this problem with distributors and how do you solve this problem with sales reps and all those kind of things. So it's very much needed in the industry. We're really happy to have built it. And we think there's a lot of opportunities there.
I feel like a theme throughout your whole career has been collaboration over competition. I mean, always learning from each other as opposed to battling it out. Can you just talk about maybe where that comes from and how that's been validated for you time and time again?
It's the thing that I pride myself on second most of anything. And it comes from my grandfather, who was a very successful retailer in Nebraska when I was a kid. And he told me just as a little boy, he would say all the time, competitors are just tomorrow's partners. And I really took that to heart. And I think it's really true also. People have this scarcity mindset that there's not enough business for everybody, and it's not true. It's just a lack of imagination. Just grow the pie. Just get more customers and everybody wins, right? That whole rising tide lifts all boats or whatever thing is very true. It sounds trite, but it's very true. And I think if you run your business as if that were the case, it may take you longer, right? Than if you're like, only these guys can succeed and those guys are us. It may take you longer to succeed, but you will succeed disproportionately eventually. And you'll be a lot happier person and you'll have a lot fewer enemies.
Yeah. Okay, Tequila Report, it's growing. It's taking a lot of time. It's like adding all these facets, in-person events, all of that. I feel like you have to scale something back or roll something back. Have you had to make any of those decisions and kind of change the trajectory of things because of this new big thing on your plate?
Not necessarily because of, but adjacent to, I'm going to take a sabbatical from speaking. So I've been doing 50 to 65 keynote speeches a year for 18 years. So, I'm on the road 180 days a year and have been for 18 years straight other than the pandemic. So there's just a lot of like hamster wheeling. And I want to see two things, sort of an experiment. I want to check two things. One, what is my life like if I'm not traveling at that level? And two, what could Tequila Report be if it had 100% of my attention, not 50%? And so I'm going to see what happens.
I'm really excited for you. And I think it's scary to stop doing something that's so like core to who you are. But
and lucrative. It's scary to quit to temporarily quit a very well-paying job for a manifestly less well-paying job. But it goes back to what we talked about when I first started, when my brother-in-law had cancer, right? It's like, it's going to be fine. I may not know exactly how it's going to work out, but it will work out. I know how to make money. We'll sort it out.
Well, and I also feel like, money is great and it also solves a lot of problems. I don't want to diminish the fact that can sometimes free up other things, but travel is so physically demanding on your body, on sleep. It's not good for you necessarily. Do you remember being good at it? Did you do certain things to make sure you were staying healthy or? Okay. Yeah. Me neither when I was traveling.
I am tolerant of it, I guess is the way to put it. I'm not like, what I got to do? I get up at 5 and I do a cold plunge. Like, bro, none of that. I am not a health nut, clearly, and certainly not in relationship to travel. My secret is don't let it bother you. It is an emotional skill, not a physical commitment, which is, it's going to suck. You're going to be annoyed, but you have to find the humor in it. And for me, it's all content. So many stories that I tell on stage or have been in books or in my newsletter, which I used to publish every 2 weeks, so much of that material comes from travel. Because you're just put into all these situations. You're like, I cannot believe. I actually thought about writing a book that is only customer experience lessons that I've witnessed in a plane.
I think that's a great book.
That's the whole book, right?
I think that's a great book.
And because both good and bad. I've seen it all. Communication and customer service, and I have. There is definitely a whole book there. Whether I write it or not, we'll see. Yeah.
Okay. We don't have to talk about this if you don't want to, but do you have good sleep habits?
No, not really. I sleep pretty well. I'm a pretty sound sleeper, but it's so funny you ask that because literally 1 second before we started this show, I was on the phone with my new sleep apnea doctor to try and get my CPAP rolling because I got diagnosed with apnea. And so I'm hoping that I will actually feel a little better.
My dad just started using a CPAP machine 6 to 8 months ago, and he's loving it. So I hope you have the same experience.
I've got 3 friends, same. They're like game changer, right? And not even using that as a throwaway line as it so often is these days. They're like literal changer of game. And I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. I've known for a bit that I probably have an issue there, but because I travel so much, I was like, bro, I'm not dragging this thing all over the country in a carry-on.
And you need special water. It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, I'm going to travel with distilled water. No, I'm not. I'm just not. Like, I know myself. I am all about efficiency, and like that ain't gonna happen. So, but now if I'm going to take a sabbatical from speaking, I'll be traveling less. And so it's more viable to work on some of these things, whether it's sleep with a CPAP machine or even more consistent exercise regimen, etc. I can't just keep collecting tequila bottles forever.
Yeah. Well, I know it's going to be weird for you to go through that change, but I personally am excited for you. I feel like it's going to be so awesome.
My wife is like, oh shit. My business partner, Maddie's like, I give it 30 days before you come up with another company. 30 days. And she's probably right.
Okay. Is your wife worried because she doesn't want to see you that much?
It's not that she doesn't want to. It's that she hasn't had to. So we've been married for 34 years, but I travel half the time. So we've really only been married 17 years in terms of calendar time, right?
Yay.
So I'm a lot, as is probably obvious from this podcast. So getting 100% of me 100% of the time is it's like living with a tsunami. And my wife is sort of the opposite of that. And so she's an introvert, right? And so she's a little like, I'm not sure that I can sustain you if you are here all the time. And she's frankly not wrong to be concerned.
Well, maybe you'll get a new hobby or something like pickleball or I don't know.
But then the hobby becomes a business like tequila did. I can't help it. You
need a therapist who tells you no more businesses and they coach you every week on how to not come up with a new idea.
I know, but purposely not seeing an opportunity is hard for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
It's like the horse blinders, where they put the things in so they can't, that's how I feel. Like just doing something for fun and be like, I know that's a business, but I'm going to refuse to do it. It feels like blinders, and it's very unsettling, actually.
Well, and I feel like that should inspire people because sometimes I think there's this misconception of like your business idea is already out there, and it might be in some version or form, but like if you're having this gnawing feeling, give it a try. And I love the fact that like you can't stop yourself from seeing business opportunities everywhere. That means they're out there.
Well, and now that I live in Mexico half the year, I've got a whole bunch of Mexican business ideas, right? Including Puerto Vallarta tour guide. I have a prototype already built for the taco and dive bar tour in Puerto Vallarta, which is all of my neighborhood. So yeah, I got a few things percolating already.
All right. So you're not really slowing down. You're just sitting still for a little bit, but doing crazy stuff in one place.
Yeah.
Okay. To close us out, I've never talked to you about being a parent before. How has that played a role in your entrepreneurial journey? In the early days, I'm sure it was a different kind of pressure and relationship.
Well, let me just take a second to acknowledge my wife, Allison, and how, I can't even describe how important and vital her role is because I was gone a lot, right? And I'm still gone a lot. My kids are grown now and have their own careers. My daughter is in grad school now in Paris. She's lived in Paris for a few years, and she's in the hospitality field. And my son's in New York City in the apparel business, working in clothes. And so they're both doing things that they love, which is super gratifying and happy and healthy. It is interesting as a parent which things they ask me about and which things they ask mom about. And the same thing was true with my parents, right? So if it has to do with business or money, they ask me. Pretty much anything else, they ask her because I am lower on the empathy scale, for sure than she is. And so I understand why they go there first. But my daughter actually interned for us for a while, when I had the agency, which is great. She was in marketing. She actually, was a marketing executive for a software company. And so she knows, that side of the business really well. So it's nice to riff with her sometimes. And if I would have kept the business, she would have been a great, steward of it. But I don't think she wanted to do that the same way that my brother was invited to take over my dad's business at one point. And he's like, yeah, I'd probably be really good at that, but I'm not sure I want to work with you in that way all the time. It's like, it's a little...
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And thanks for sharing so much today. I feel like normally you're talking about all the business advice, but today we got to know a little bit more about you, and I really appreciate it. Get out of here. Not at all. I think it's really hard for some people to understand that successful people like yourself that they've maybe heard of or seen or whatever, like they're still functioning their day to day and trying to make it all work like the rest of us. So I thought it was immensely valuable, and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Tequila Report. We'll send everyone there. Is your personal website still alive and well too? Okay, great. So Tequila Report first, jaybaer.com if you want to know more. Amazing.